Hey everyone, this is Steve Bishop, and we're doing a live broadcast. And I got to tell you right now, I'm having a little trouble getting John hooked up here. We're going to be interviewing John Sonmez here. Sonmez from, he's got a great YouTube channel. I don't know if you guys have ever watched it. It's called Simple Programmer. And he's got a lot of terrific advice on there about how to kind of balance your life both with the development, how do you kind of organize your life around your development schedule and still maintain your ability to be with your friends and sorry, I just got a notification that I got a newsletter out. Hey, John.
How's it
there
going?
we go. Hey, yeah, I'm glad that we got this all hooked up, man. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on my show here. This is actually just the second episode I've ever done of something like this. So congratulations on being one of the few privileged few.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, John, I was just telling people who might just be coming on right now that you have your YouTube channel. And it's really designed to talk about balancing your life around your programming schedule. Can you talk a little bit more about your YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. So it's it's a little bit hard to describe. There's a lot of stuff on there. So I basically kind of focus around everything that is not a technical skill for software developers. So a lot of that is career advice, because a lot of software developers, and that's how I get them in, right? But then I don't want to just tell you about career advice, because that's not the end all be all, right? That's still sort of the same part of your life. So I go into a lot of other topics, really things focused around personal development, right? How can you be a stronger person? How can you live up to your potential? How can you tackle the kind of challenges that you have in life and come out on top and be better and start to think about some of these things. So I really go into a lot of different topics from I've touched on, I do a lot of fitness stuff because
you're a definite fitness guru. We can tell that by any number of your videos where you're wearing the beach shirt and everything.
Oh yeah. So I do that, and I go into a lot of different topics that I just think are relevant, that especially a lot of it is a lot of the struggles that I'm going through as I'm developing as a person, as I'm growing, and I'm kind of sharing that and almost almost coaching myself to some degree. I've hit on things like relationships. A lot of guys in the tech community have emailed me and said, John, I don't have a girlfriend. I'm like 30 years old. Please help me. So I said, okay, well, let me see what I can do there. And
well, let me just tell you, I actually have a wife. So it is possible, guys. It is possible. You can get married and be in this business.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's kind of it. It's kind of all over the place. Sometimes I'm not afraid to hit controversial topics. That's what, one of the things is like, but I try to do it in a way that, that I always say, like, as far as opinions and politics and stuff like that, that what I want to do is I don't want to just give you my opinion, because that's not really valuable. Who cares? But is there a teaching? Is there a lesson? Is there something that we can learn from this? So I'm not, in general, like, I'm not going to tell you who I think you should vote for, or blah, blah, blah on this particular topic, unless it's really, really relevant to something that you're actually going to apply in your life, not just something you're going to argue with someone about. So.
Right. Yeah. It's so easy to get bogged down into the politics or the religion. And I saw your Donald Trump video that you posted yesterday, and it's interesting to kind of delve a little bit into some of those topics, but you really don't want to in this kind of arena, because you never know how that's going to affect or impact your career down the line. If somebody sees some sort of comment that you made, obviously 11 years ago, you could make a comment and it impacts you later on.
Exactly. Yeah. That was an interesting one, because it was sort of one of these things where, like, I've stayed out of it, for the most part. I mean, people could probably guess kind of where I leaned in different things, but I really wanted to, and I always catch the most flack for this, which is kind of interesting, is when I make videos where I talk about using your own brain and not being just loyal to any particular, organization or person or side. And people seem to really get upset about that, but it just kind of shows that that's sort of the default. Is like we don't even realize how much we are influenced. Where and social media has just made this more apparent. Facebook and Twitter has really polarized people more into quote camps, where I think we used to be a little bit more bipartisan than what we are now. And it's simply because we don't realize this. We don't realize this is happening, that we used to like look at things, or maybe not, but in my opinion, we used to look at things and we used to like take a list of things and say, yeah, I agree with that, don't agree with that, agree with that. But now it just
platforms.
Seems like,
yeah. Parties used to have platforms, and now it's just about personality. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So obviously politics is something we could definitely get into, and I'm sure we could do another hour-long video just on talking about it, because I'm a huge political guy too. But I do want to kind of get into a little bit about you, and tell us a little bit about like where you grew up, and did you have any brothers or sisters growing up?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, I was actually Air Force. My dad was Air Force growing up. So I'm from everywhere. Yep, exactly. So I grew up on a lot of military bases, and I actually have two younger sisters. So I was the firstborn, but I've traveled around. Like growing up, we were stationed in South Carolina, Alaska, Idaho, Hawaii, Florida. So I've kind of been around quite a bit.
Yeah, I know what that's like too. My family moved around a lot too. I had Oregon, California, Washington, Idaho, Colorado. I mean, it's interesting how you can find yourself moving a lot as a kid if your family's trying to find work. But
Yeah.
especially if you're in the military, you're moving a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
So, like I said earlier, one of the first things that people notice about you is that you don't look like a typical programmer, right? You don't look like you play Pokemon Go as your form of exercise.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you decided to. I mean, how does you think that it parallels? How do you think your exercise routine parallels a little bit with your programming life?
Yeah, so I grew up sort of as a typical, stereotypical kind of geek nerdish kind of picked on kid in school, right? I mean, I definitely, I think, and that's why I think I identify with a lot of my audiences, because I was not a jock in school, right? Not at first, at least. Like I eventually in high school, I got tired of being beat up in Hawaii. And I started lifting weights. I actually, it's kind of funny. I was a very shy person. I was very much non-athletic, all kind of the opposite of a lot of the things that I am now. And I woke up one morning, really in high school, and this thought was in my head, and it was, why not me? And I thought like, what is different? Like, why couldn't I be whatever I wanted to be, right? And what's the difference? Biologically, nothing, right? It's just it's a choice that I make. So I started making a different choice. So I actually started. I envisioned the person that I wanted to become. I envisioned what I wanted to look like. I envisioned what I wanted to act like. I envisioned, how I wanted to be, and I started pretending to be that person. The kind of fake it till you make it.
Until you make it. I just used that term on Sunday when I was actually at church the other day. So it's an interesting thing how if you just continue to push yourself to be happy, force yourself to be happy around other people, then those people will kind of reflect your happiness, and then you in turn will become happier. And I think that the fake it till you make it for a lot of things is a very important concept that we should really be driving home to ourselves on a daily basis.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, people don't realize so much that we get to choose. Sometimes people get upset when I say fake it till you make it, and they say, well, you should be real. You should be yourself, not try to be someone else. And the answer that I have to that is that we get to choose who we are. we've always had the power of that choice, and personalities and people change constantly. There is no you. You is in flux. It's what you want it to be. And so, you know, the interesting thing that happens with that, and what happened in my life, is that I was pretending. I was acting like I was an actor, playing this role, stepping into these shoes. And then before I knew it, I was actually that person that I was striving to become. And now I have a new vision of who I want to become. And I always have this vision. I'll never reach my goal. I'll never be the person I want to be. But as I progress on the path I want, I see more potential, and I have a new vision, and I'm heading in that direction. And so I'm always faking until I make it. I'm always doing things that make me uncomfortable. I'm always growing in that area. And that's kind of how the fitness part of it came in. That was, you know, I wanted to maximize my potential from a physical perspective. And that's, you know, there's a lot of other aspects where that physical, that I really believe that a good way to develop mental discipline is through physical discipline, because you can't have, you know, one without the other.
You got your martial arts that do kind of the same type of thing, right? The martial arts, taekwondo or jiu-jitsu or something like that. It's the same. Your mental and physical connection has to be one. You have to be together with both of those sides of yourself in order to be a complete individual.
Exactly. Yep. Totally agree.
So, you are obviously a prolific author now. You've written several books, I take it, online. I think that we saw. You're constantly promoting them on your website. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity here to talk a little bit about your latest book, and maybe kind of tell people where they might be able to find it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the latest book I'm putting together right now, you know, I did a traditionally published book called Soft Skills, the Software Developer's Life Manual, and that did really well. And one of the most popular sections out of that was the career section. And I'm starting to forget some of the career stuff because it's been a while, right? I haven't been a programmer and I haven't been in a corporate job for a while, but I have a lot of stuff from my career that I want to get onto paper before I lose this stuff, right? Because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there that can help some developers. So what I did was I decided to create a book called The Complete Software Developer's Career Guide. And
well, we can all use that one.
Yeah. And it's very akin to, if you read my soft skills book, it's a very large book. It's 150,000 words, and it covers like life, right? This one covers your career from beginning to end. Like the idea here is like, from getting into software development and choices and college and boot camp and all that, to getting your first job and how to do that and so negotiate your salary and all of that, to the next phase of working as a developer. How do you work with your boss, your coworkers, do the review process, get promotions, and then finally to this, and then all the technologies and things that you need to know about, like what do you need to know as a software developer, and then finally, how do you advance your career? Like, you know, how do you go and start speaking or writing books or doing whatever you can to advance your career? So it's kind of this whole, probably will be a 2-volume set, but right now I am releasing it for free. So chapter by chapter. Wow. I'm still writing it. I'm almost done. I'm at like 130,000 words or so into it. I've got maybe like 15 more chapters to go. Short chapters, 3,000 word chapters, but right. It's releasing on my blog. So I think the best way to sign up, like you can get it for free, and I'll eventually be selling it too, but you know, I give it away for free. It's through the blog, which is just to go to simpleprogrammer.com/career guide.
Okay. /career guide.
Yes.
And we'll definitely have to put a link in the comment section below so that people can not only find your channel, but also find your webpage and find those books, because it's really helpful to have that type of stuff be available for free. And I know you're a genuine guy. You really want us as developers to become more of a community kind of based group of people that are helping each other out along this journey. And I really appreciate that you put out these kind of work for us to read at our leisure and try to envelop some of that experience that you've accumulated over the course of your career. So that does bring me into my next question I had for you, kind of talking about how we have that life cycle of ourselves in development, right? So software has a life cycle. We have a life cycle. So what was like the way that you got into technology? What was your first, foray into it?
It's hard to trace it back to a single event. I think there's a accumulation of different things. But one of the things that really got me into programming and put me down this path was, I remember when I was a kid, when I first connected to the internet and I was on BBS systems, there was
BBS.
Yeah, major BBS. I remember and you would use Telnet, and you could get access to these MUDs, these multi-user dungeons, or text-based. For the young people out there, that it's World of Warcraft without graphics.
Right, Legend of the Red Dragon. That was a big one. Legend of the Red Dragon.
Yeah, it was
basically BBS, as a matter of fact.
Oh, you do? You do now?
No, I did. I did back in the day.
Okay,
that was actually one of the first things that I did. Was
nice.
I had a BBS that was running off Turboard, which is a very special little shareware application that I got a hold of.
Okay, yes.
But yeah, BBSs are near and dear to my heart because they were my first foray into being much deeper into computers than just the typical sit it on the desktop somewhere and write up a Word document. You actually got into it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would say that was really, I played MUDs and I'd actually run my own BBS too, and logged on to BBSs, played, was it Trade Wars and Major MUD and all that. Gosh, those were the days. It was just so much fun back then.
Were you ever on the IRC, on Internet Relay Chat?
Oh yeah. I actually met my wife on IRC. So.
Oh really? Really?
Yeah.
Were you on Undernet or FNet or any one of those?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's been a while. I think it must have been Undernet. I'm trying to think. I think you'd like the IRC clients back then. I think you could like just switch between the servers, right, and figure out where you wanted to.
Yeah. You had to use that MIRC application by Khalid Mardambe, who was the author. I still remember Khalid Mardambe was the guy that wrote that application that we all love. And that was actually how I got into programming, was because I did some scripting for MIRC. And
nice.
You can still find Protection Pro that I wrote like 25 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to reminisce. I was just saying those were the days. It's like that golden era to me. I don't know. It's always will bring back such great memories of IRC and BBSs, and so.
Yeah, and speaking of which was the first language that you learned?
So technically, it would be like the very, very first language I ever had any introduction to would be Apple Basic, because in school we had some Apple IIes, and but I wouldn't really say. I mean, I don't know. It's a pretty simple language. But C/C++, because when I was working on the MUDs, when I was creating my own MUD, and I'd gotten the source code, I basically like taught myself C from looking at the source code in the MUD and modifying it. So that was really the first like real language that I delved into, and I went from that to C++. At that time, there was also a lot of environments where it was C/C++, right? Because no one knew what they were doing. They was like object-oriented, I don't know, like
or do C++ or and it's funny because one of the common questions I get, and I know you actually answered this not long ago. I watched your blog video on this very subject, that you recommend that the first programming language, that if you're a beginner just kind of starting out, a good language to learn is Java, because it is so, not only because it's so wanted in the industry, but it kind of prepares you. It has that same C syntax that a lot of the other languages have, like JavaScript and C++ and all of those. So would you still say that Java is kind of the thing that people should try to learn, or do you think one of the .NET languages is something people should learn?
Yeah, it's hard. It really is very hard to give like advice on this because there's a lot of options that you could go with. I think one of the reasons why I picked Java as one of the good choices is simply because, like you said, it is an object-oriented language. If you know Java, you know C#, so you can move over to there. There's a huge amount of jobs still in software that's running in the Java space. So I think that, and there's a lot of information, especially a lot of free information out there. So I think that kind of goes for that. Languages like C++, awesome language, very very difficult language, but that's the problem for beginners. A lot of beginners try to start on that, and it's like it's not really the best language to learn anymore because it's a really difficult learning curve. You can get frustrated and quit, and it's not as useful as anymore. And then you look at like C# is probably the language I prefer the most. So I'd like to recommend that one, but to me, it's like, well, if you learn C# or Java, it really doesn't make that much of a difference because they're kind of, they're basically the same language for the most part, right? There's differences, but if you know one, you can easily learn the other. And then you kind of got the JavaScript out there. A lot of people, I mean, that's a lot of new programmers, that's their first language, but that is such a tricky language. It's such a different paradigm that I'm like, well, I don't know if that's where you really want to start. You certainly can. And then you've got languages like Python. I suppose that's probably a good one for beginners. And it depends on where you go. But when pressed, when it's like, well, what's kind of going to fit the best case for just about anyone starting out? To me, I still kind of fall back to Java just because of that versatility. Yeah. So.
Well, and we have an interesting kind of scenario here on my channel. It gained the majority of its popularity because the first set of videos I released was on Access, Microsoft Access, which has a form of Visual Basic, Visual Basic for applications on the back end. And I talked about that, and it's really a scripting language for the back end of the Access framework. And it gave a very, VB is a very nice language because it uses syntax that's more common language kind of things. But there is definitely a divide between Visual Basic and C# or Java. And it's not always easy to make that leap from Visual Basic to C#. And I'm almost surprised in a way that Microsoft is still continuing to use and support VB in all their products, except for, of course, ASP.NET Core, where they've decided, no, we're not going to do VB, at least for right now. They're not, that you can only do it in C#. So I think they're kind of forcing people to get off of VB finally, but they're still supporting it with all of the Office, products. Is there any kind of advice you might give somebody that is trying to make that conversion from one language to another? Should they try to find stuff that relates one language to another, or do you think that they should just try to go into it with a blank slate and start fresh with a new language?
I would say, especially in that case, to just try and start with a blank slate and be fresh with a new language. Because it's, especially in that case, because it's so different, right? I mean, if they're closer, then you can get away with it, but you really want to be programming not just in the language, but in the paradigm of the language as well. So, sometimes, I mean, this definitely happened in the C++ and C days, right? Is you would have C programmers that would learn C++. And what they learned was the syntax of C++. And so what they would do is they would write C using C++ syntax. And that was really bad because they weren't doing, the difference between C and C++ is not so much the syntax, because C++ is a superset of C, but it is the paradigm. It's how C++ is object-oriented. C is not. And that's a key thing.
It's a whole different. Going from like the VBA, which is more of a procedural language, to a C# or even VB.NET, which is an object-oriented language, the way you have to think about concepts and the way that you format things in your application are a completely different construct. And it's hard to wrap your brain around this idea that you don't have basically a order of steps that are happening. Instead, you have states in these classes that hold state. It's a very different way to think about how your code is supposed to behave.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You want people that are learning C# to write idiomatic C#, not C# that's VBA code that is, you know what I'm saying? So you've got to change the paradigm thinking. And I think that's why it's good. And the thing is, like, you will pick up things like, if you know one programming language, if you're used to solving problems and writing algorithms, even if you pick up a different language with a different paradigm and start over, there are going to be some connections. It's not like you're starting over from total scratch, but you should attempt to start over from scratch simply so that you adopt the idiomatic way of coding that language. What is the paradigm for that language so that you can write code that way? I mean, it's even between just Java and C#, just the way that we do the casing in the camel cases versus that it is different, right? And
yeah, right.
I struggled with that a lot. I struggle with it still. Like when I write C# code, sometimes I write Java sharp a lot. So
yeah, Java sharp a lot. Yeah, I can definitely see that. That's the funny thing about some of these languages, is that they are so close to each other that it is easy to make that transition from one language to another, versus the leap, like I was talking about, from VBA or Visual Basic to C#. Yeah, there are some similar concepts like switches and if statements and loops and that sort of thing, but the syntax is totally different. The object-oriented way that you have to think about things is completely different. That you're right. I think a lot of it is you got to start with a clean slate if there is such a big gap between the two different languages that you're trying to learn. But if it is just the leap between Java to C#, that's not so bad. But obviously, like you're talking about with C to C++, that's a whole different animal too, where you can easily tie yourself into thinking that it's the same essential language, but be causing yourself more trouble and bugs and syntax errors just because you're not thinking about it the correct way.
Exactly. Yep.
So what would you say are some of the different milestones along the way that have kind of marked your career path, like kind of formed the direction that you decided to go?
Okay. So I think the first one that I can recall was going to college and actually learning Java, and sitting in this Java 101 class and trying to do code to do sorting algorithms and to indexing and arrays, iterators, loop iterators, and
Boy.
I just, like, that was how you began the Java class, and I hated it. I didn't want to be a programmer anymore. I was like, if this is programming, like, if we have to like manually check iterators and do this and write sort algorithms, I don't want to do this. This is not for me. I thought I was going to make some games. Right. So
yeah, we all wanted to be a game programmer, right? We all want to get Unity 3D up and start building some meshes and stuff, but
exactly.
we don't realize that there's these arrays and you have to do, like you said, indexing of arrays. I remember one of the first things, and I hated it, was my boss wanted me to make 3 different arrays and figure out the correlation between the data that's in those 3 different arrays, and fill in those arrays with data and then extract the data from the arrays. And I'm thinking, why am I doing this? I could just use a collection. I could use a table. I could do any number of different ways to do this.
Yep. So so that kind of left a bad taste in my. I almost quit. I almost went into CIS instead of CS. And then what actually ended up happening was I got a summer job at HP, and I decided not to go back to school because I was already making good money. I got a kind of a testing job, and I was doing a little bit of programming, and I was like, wow, I'm already making what I intended to make after school. So I just kept that job and I didn't go back to school. So that was kind of a marker. Then later in my career, or very shortly after that, I got this ridiculous job that was paying $75 an hour. I was like 19 years old. It was during the .com thing. I moved down to Santa Monica, California to go take this job, and I thought, okay, this is it. I've made it. I'm good now. And that lasted for a while, like maybe like a year and a half or 2 years. But then the .com sort of bubble started to burst, and I had to find another job, and I couldn't find a job that paid as much. So I took a lesser job and moved to Phoenix, and then that, the 9/11 hit, and that company went under, and so I had to find another job, and this time I couldn't even find a job, and I took a lesser job, and my skills weren't really that good. Like I didn't really know, I wasn't that, I was bright, but I wasn't focused. I wasn't working hard. And so at that point, that was where I decided, okay, I need to learn. I need to really become good. So I started actually competing on a site called Top Coder, and I improved my C++ skills at that point to a very high level. I was competing at the highest levels there, and it was fun. And I got really, really good. I really mastered C++ and the standard template language library and all that. And so that was a milestone right there. That changed everything, because once I was actually good, now I could go, and it was still difficult to get jobs without having the marketing aspect, which I didn't understand, but it changed the way I fundamentally changed as a programmer, and I started teaching a lot more, and then I would say that the next milestone would have happened at when I ended up creating the Simple Programmer blog, and in that environment where I was at, this work environment, I was a very hardcore C# developer and very much a technology bigot, and I wasn't put in charge of a Java team. And so I sort of learned that you need to, that there's good things on both sides, that the Java and the C#, the .NET world and the Java world, who sometimes hate each other, that there was good, like it wasn't one or the other. And so that was a real big growth experience for me. I grew as a developer, as a person, and as a technology leader, I think, to be able to take the leadership position there. And that was, that was huge. And creating the blog also at the same time, like, you put me in a different direction. And so, yeah, I think those were the major. And then, of course, when I started doing Pluralsight courses, because I ended up doing the Pluralsight courses, really changed the direction of my career, as it gave me an exit from the standard 9-to-5 work, and ended up working for myself, and kind of bootstrapping Simple Programmer from there. And then finally, I'd say, I gave this talk on how to market yourself as a software developer, and a lot of people really liked that, and I realized, maybe I should focus on some of these non-technical skills that are so valuable. And so that was another milestone that put me in that direction. So now I'm where I'm at.
Well, and we're glad that you have taken this path, because I think sharing your knowledge, and we actually talked about this a little bit earlier, but sharing your knowledge and sharing your experience with other people that are trying to go through the industry is a very big and kind of a missing component to the world that we have today in the programming world, because everybody's just so focused on the technical and driving to learning more and more things, right. Especially because the technology is always changing. We've always got something new coming out, that you can't really stay stagnant in what you know. Otherwise, you're just going to be passed by the industry. But there are some people that I've noticed do have that little niche. They find that, that little application that they got, or they know that one programming language, like Fox Pro, for example.
Right.
If you still know Fox Pro, you can find a job, because there are companies out there that still use the dang thing, and you're going to be able to find a place to work because you have that skill. But that kind of leads me into my next question for you. With the nature of technology constantly being so fluid and changing, do you think it's even really wise to have a long-term plan for yourself? Or do you think it's kind of, you just got to kind of go with the flow of the technology and try to continuously learn?
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. You go to a job interview and they say, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or what's your 5-year plan? And no one knows what's going to happen in 5. You can't make a 5-year goal and hit the 5-year goal, but you should always have a 5-year goal, right? And you're never going to hit it, and it's always going to change, but you got to have a direction you're going. You got to have somewhere out there, even though you know in 5 years you are not going to be doing what you think that you're going to be doing or whatever your 5-year goal is, but it puts you in a direction. And your 1-year goal could actually be really accurate, right? So, but you got to have the 5 years puts you on the course, which lets you make the 1-year goal. So I guess what I'm saying here is basically like, have an idea. Always plan your career such that you do plan what you're going to do in 5 years. Think about that, because that's going to determine what your shorter term goals are, and it's going to determine what your habits are and what your daily practices, and you're going to achieve a lot more if you're aiming big, if you're shooting for big targets. So look for that big target, 5 years out, and know that it's going to change, but aim for it anyway, right? And so I would say that technology is going to change, all this stuff is going to change, but that doesn't mean that you can't. You've got to adjust, just like an agile environment, right? We're always adjusting. We have the requirements, but we know the requirements are going to change. But that doesn't mean that we just throw up our hands and say, well, we can't know what to build, so we're not building anything. No, we go with the best knowledge that we have, and we aim and we go in that direction. If we have to change directions or things change, then we do. But with that said, I do think that it is important to build some kind of a specialty, right? Everyone who has a specialty is going to be a lot more valuable as a software developer. So you do need to pick some kind of niche, some kind of specialty, and go down that road. And sometimes you'll be wrong. Sometimes it'll have to change. I think one example I always use of this is my good friend John Papa. He was he was the Silverlight guy, right? I mean, he even had a television show on Microsoft.
Silverlight,
right?
Yeah. And what a fascinating technology to have gotten into, and then guess what?
It's gone, right? But now, so there were some other Silverlight people that are gone, but John survived. Why? Because even though he specialized in Silverlight, a Doom technology, someone from knowing it now would have said, John, don't do that. That's a bad idea. He just shifted. He just shifted into spas. Now he's kind of the spa guy, right? He does spa, he does Angular, he does, that kind of thing. So even if you pick a wrong specialty, even if the technology shifts on you, it doesn't mean that you can't not go somewhere. You can go somewhere from there, build up an audience, build up a reputation, and then see where you can jump from there. Don't just say, oh, well, I'm not going to specialize because, whatever technology might disappear, or it might not be around. Yeah, you don't know. That might happen, but it doesn't mean that you're dead. You're only dead if you don't grow. So
I hope that all of my Access people are listening to this. This is very, very important, because Access is one of those things that for a long time it's been stated Microsoft's going to drop Access. They're not going to keep it. It's such a dying thing, and yet every new iteration of Office has a new release of Access with a few minor tweaks here and there, and they just keep bringing out the dead horse over and over and over again. Hoping that the community will eventually drop it, but the community loves Access because of its ease of use and how simple it is to just get an application up and running for your business. But typically it's frowned upon for enterprise style of development. So if you guys are out there watching this video and you use Access for all of your development, and you're worried about the longevity of how long Access is going to be around, don't worry so much about whether or not Access is going to fail or go away. Focus more on the fact that you are learning, and once you have this skill, it's not so difficult to transition to another programming language, because those concepts will be much more understandable to you when you do decide to go to a .NET language or PHP or C++ or Java, or Python, or I hesitate to say Ruby because I know your thoughts on Ruby there, John, but it just don't lose hope. Just because you think that something might be dying off soon doesn't mean you should just give up on it and just say, well, this isn't going to work out for me, so I'm not going to get into programming because of this. So.
And there's a real good opportunity here too, right? Because if you're an Access expert, right, and then you learn something else, let's say C Sharp or something like that, and you're able to, now what you can do is you can be a specialist, and your specialty can be, I take existing Access applications which are no longer supported and I convert them into standalone C Sharp applications, WPF applications, or whatever it is, right? You're using a database. And so you can develop a set of skills that will actually make you way more valuable than just Access alone, because there's people that can write, you know, WPF applications or whatever applications or web applications, and there's people that know Access, but there's not as many people that do both, or that are experts that can do that transition. And a lot of companies that have Access, they want to transition off of it. They would like to. And if you can come in there and be that guy and say, oh, look, I can rewrite this application for you, I know Access inside out, that's a really good selling proposition.
Yeah, and to take your point, the business that I work for, we have a bunch of different clients that for the last decade and a half, they've been getting Access applications. You know, that's what we've been delivering to them, is Access, because we have found ways of using it very efficiently and very targeted. While, you know, it's a very easy process to develop something so we can get it up for them very quickly. But now they're starting to look at, well, there's some limitations to this Access technology. We can't go web. We can't go, you know, we can't go to more desktops. We keep having to buy these licenses for Access. We don't want to do that. So we are in that conversation with them now. Okay, well, let's talk about web applications. We can take what you have in Access and we can put it in web applications. And it's because of the knowledge that, you know, that we've accumulated here at the office, that we are positioned then to have that conversation, say, okay, well, let's talk about getting you over from those Access applications. What's the process that we should go through in order to make that happen? So yeah, I think it's good to have multi-skill, you know, be that Swiss Army knife, if you will, for your company, because they are going to rely upon you having those multiple skills.
Yep.
So speaking of which, where do you, I mean, just kind of projecting out into the future, what do you think the most potential for growth in our industry is? Like, do you see any particular language taking over or any particular technology kind of taking over?
That's a tough one. You know, there's kind of what I think will happen and what I would like to happen and what I think is inevitable. We're almost at this point. I've been listening to a lot of what Bob Martin's been saying about.
Yeah, I love Bob Martin. Bob Martin.
Yeah, he's a huge mentor for me. He's talking with his craftsmanship movement and stuff, and I think I heard him on .NET Rocks recently, and he was talking about this idea that we're inventing stuff for the sake of inventing stuff. Like we don't need some of this stuff, some of these advancements. We already have them. And I'm sort of thinking he's right. I'm almost thinking like we need like one programming language. And it's kind of like, you know, with electrical engineering, you don't have multiple competing languages, as far as I understand, for making electrical engineering type of diagrams, right? There's one standard that you utilize, and that's because it works. You can do anything with it. And we've sort of hit this point with programming languages where we can do whatever we need to do, right? There's not major advancements, right? We've sort of explored most of the areas, and we can sort of condense. So I'd like to see in the future like more of a condensed technology, right? And it sounds a little bit weird, but just, you know, hear me out here. Imagine if we only had one programming language, and it was a capable programming language that everyone pretty much worked in, and it worked for all the kind of applications that you might use it for. Imagine how much we would advance with that one language. If everyone's efforts were focused on that one language and developing libraries for that language and building applications, and the skill set was uniform, then we could focus on bigger things. Right now, as technologists, as programmers, we have to learn so many different things and so many different programming languages and keep up to date with all of this stuff. If we sort of condense that down, I think we'd be in a really good place. Maybe it's not one, maybe it's two, but we've got too much out here right now. And so I think, like, to actually make a real prediction of the future, I think we will see somewhat of a collapse of technologies and into that. And, you know, the best prediction I think I can make for the future at least so far, is that the way I've seen technology work is it's like a pendulum, right? It swings from the left to the right, but every time it swings just a little bit forward too. It goes in the Z direction. So, and that's how we advance. And so we've gone from thick clients to thin clients to thick clients, right? I mean, we started off writing, thick client applications, then everyone went to the web. Then we added Flash and Silverlight to the web, which was actually a thick client inside a web application, right? And then we went to, Ajax-y stuff, and now we're at SPAs. And so we keep on going back and forth between thick and thin client. We do the same thing between functional programming and object-oriented programming. And,
yeah.
And so, my prediction would be, if you want to know what's happening in the future, look in the past, because whatever was old is going to be new again. That's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. I actually have a viewer question here, which I think is pretty good. Bartek has asked, so what should I choose to learn after Access? I'm going to create applications similar to database application from Access, but more advanced and easier available. I'm going to give a quick little answer, and I'm going to leave the floor open here to John. But I think we kind of covered that a little bit, in that we're saying, some of the C# or Java type languages are a really good place to move on to from Access, because you'll get that knowledge base that you can translate to many more development languages and many more applications. Once you learn C#, once I learned C#, the world of possibilities of what I can develop, just grew monumentally. I was able to learn the full stack of .NET, and that meant I could make web applications. I could use Light Switch, which kind of utilizes some of the Silverlight technology as well, which Light Switch is an okay technology. I wish they would get a little bit better with it. But I was able to learn Light Switch. I was able to do the web applications, WPF applications, the old Win32 applications. So I'm able to do all of these new things and other technologies. And then once I learned C#, JavaScript is not that dissimilar. There's obviously quite a bit of difference between the two, but at least I understood the syntax. I understood the concepts. So for me, the leap to C#, or like what John was saying earlier, Java, is one of those two languages to get you at least to a good base of knowledge that you can translate to any of those other areas of technology. I think is probably the best way to go. What do you think there, John?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say to give sort of a different angle at looking at this, Access does what? It allows you, right? Access is essentially an application that has the user interface and the database all in one thing, right? That's kind of my understanding. It's been a while since I worked in Access, but I definitely did some Access programming. And you create the user
watch some Access videos there, John. I got a whole series you might want to check out.
All right. But you're essentially creating the entire app. You've got the user interface and the database. It's all kind of combined in there, right? So I would say almost like look for a stack that is going to allow you to do the same capabilities you can do with Access in a more modern technology, right? In programming language, so that'll be a programming language, it'll be a database, and it'll be some kind of like web framework or backend system. And so then I would say, one thing that you can do is take some Access application that you've wrote that you understand really well and port it over. And that's a good way to learn, right? So say, okay, how could I take this Access application, a fairly simple one, and what if I wanted to make it a web application? What would I need to do? Well, I need a database. Okay, so I need to learn a little bit about a database that I can utilize, and I need a programming language, and I need, right, and figure out a stack that already exists that people are using that you can do that. And making that transition, this is, I think, having that analogy, again, it might seem like I'm contradicting myself because I said, oh, you should start over with a new programming language. And I mean that from a syntax standpoint. Don't try and write, VBA script inside of C#, but you should.
You'll run into a lot of syntax problems.
Yes. You should definitely use the analogy of the application that you're building. Like in Access, you click, drag a button and you wire this button up. How to get this data from the Access database? How do you do that, right? Well, figure out, if you take that and you say, well, how would I do the same thing in C# if I was using ASP.NET MVC? If that's the stack you're going to go, and then figure that out, because that's going to accelerate your learning. It's going to be much less of a jump if you can just take the things that you already know and say, well, how do I do this in terms of this other technology stack?
Well, that's great advice. I think you're absolutely right on. And for those of you who don't know what he means by stack, he just means basically the development platform that you're planning on building your application on. So I know I got a lot of beginners out there that might be watching this video, so I just wanted to make clear what he's talking about there. So with the advancements of the technology, I think in general we're going to see more web and cell phone, smartphone type of development, with the different web or with the different applications that you get on Android and Apple. Do you think there's still a career in desktop applications, or do you think that we're just going so much more to the mobile market and the web market that better for your career if you just focus more on those other on the web and app disciplines?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that there'll always be some stuff, I think, on the desktop side. I think there'll always be that, but I don't think it's a good choice right now. I think that as the processors get faster, as the technology improves, the hardware improves, we're going to be more and more web-based, just because essentially what the web browser has become now is a virtualization layer. It has become its own operating system. I mean, even Chrome OS, right? It's essentially a virtualization layer. It's not very efficient, but it works, and it's becoming. At some point, we'll break through this barrier. Right now, there's this barrier where it's like, okay, well, if you develop it in a web application, you write your code in JavaScript, it's not as efficient as writing it natively in C++ or in .NET and C# on running on, which is virtualized, but the C++ C# area has been pretty much broken right in the desktop. We don't say, oh, we need to perform an app, so let's write it in C++. No, we don't care, like, unless you're writing a game. So the same thing I think will happen with the web. Once we hit this point where it's like, okay, there's really no difference performance-wise between and ease-wise, right? Because right now we've got frameworks like we've got React, right? We've got to some degree Angular, but Meteor, right? And we've got more of these frameworks where you don't have to think about Ajax. You don't have to think about that you're writing a web application. You're writing a web application when you're using these frameworks a lot like you're writing a desktop application, right? It's not the client-server model anymore. Even though that's happening underneath, you're programming from a thick client, a desktop type of model. And so when we hit that point and the hardware allows us where the performance is enough, then I think we're going to even see mobile apps disappear, and it's just going to be, everything virtualizes in the browser, and everything is a web app. So kind of the funny thing about that, though, too, again with the pendulum, is that essentially it'll be the same skills as the desktop skill, right? Writing web apps today is a lot more like writing desktop apps, right, than it was yesterday. If you look at frameworks like React, right? Like if you're familiar with React.js, it looks very much to me like when we were creating components in MVC and doing it on the server side, and now we're doing it on the client side. And so it's interesting. Like I think that I would not count on the desktop environment staying the way it is. I think those skills will transfer, but you gotta look and see where things are going. And to me, I think that, like I said, I think we're going to hit this point where right now, like if I was going to build a mobile app, I got to think, okay, well, should I write a web one or should I write a native mobile app? And my answer is native one, because the web one still is not quite as performant. It's not going to work as well, but that will eventually evaporate. And when that does, then a whole class of desktop and mobile apps is going to disappear. Just like when we moved to the web with the first push, there's a second wave coming. So, yeah,
I think you're right. You're right about that pendulum. It seems like we always keep shifting back and forth. And a good one that you were talking about was functional programming versus object-oriented programming. And there's these two different camps about things, but I've actually kind of tried to work out a balance between both object-oriented and functional that really, uses the solid principles, which I do plan on coming out with a video series on that a little bit later on down the road, because I think solid principles and functional programming can work very well hand in hand. But it has been this kind of pendulum shift, and you see it throughout the technology, like you're talking about with the web, going from client to server and server back to client. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing that happens in our little bubble of technology.
Yeah.
So I do have another question here that I wanted to get to that I noticed that Harris posted up on the YouTube comments here. He asks, do you believe having deadlines for your project accelerates your learning? And I'm just going to give a quick little answer here, and then I'll let John go ahead and speak about this. I think deadlines are entirely a personality thing. If you are not that well self-motivated to go out and learn things on your own, just if you have a voracious appetite for the new and what's out there, then deadlines are inconsequential, and you'll bust through them anyway. So there's almost no point in having them, because you're just going to keep going. But sometimes they're still good because they keep you on task. So even if you have that voracious appetite, but you start going off into some other direction, then you just start learning your brains out. You sometimes need those deadlines to keep you focused on what you have to really get accomplished. And then to the other side, for those of you who are a little less motivated, you need that little extra kick in the pants to say, I really got to learn this and I got to know it now. But make sure that you are setting realistic deadlines. If you are just starting out, some of these deadlines, I hear about the agile projects and say, oh, we got a 1 or 2 week turnaround on our agile cycles. Well, for somebody who's barely learning C# or barely learning Java, a 2 week turnaround on a project, you better have a very short, small project, or else you're not going to meet that deadline. So just make sure you're setting realistic goals for yourself. But I do think that they can help you, even if you have that real go-getter attitude towards it. They can help you, like I said, stay grounded in what you need to learn. But they also help for those of you who are not so voracious and just kind of need that little extra motivation to go out and learn something. So, John, what do you think?
I would say that it's not so much the deadline, but you need some kind of a constraint or quota, right? It could be, you need to pick one. Like a deadline can work. Like let's take me writing my book, for example, right? So there's two methods that I could use. There's 3 methods I could use to write the book. One, I could not just have I could just have no plan, and I could just write as I feel like writing or get time. That will result in me getting the book done in 4 or 5 years, or maybe never. Okay, that's option one. That's what most people choose. That's bad. Second one is I could set a deadline. I could say, okay, 2 months from now or 3 months, whatever, this is when the book is going to be done. And I am holding to this deadline, and I'm working backwards from there, and everything is I'm going to hit that deadline and really take it seriously. And that I will have a very high probability of hitting that deadline if I honestly take it seriously and really work, and set that. It'll at least increase my chances, right? It still requires discipline, still requires you, right? So the third option is I could say, and this is actually what I'm doing right now, is I say, okay, instead of a deadline, I'm going to write for an hour every single day. It's guaranteed progress. I'm going to make progress every single day. I'm going to write for an hour, and I guarantee you that in 10 days, I will have 10 hours worth of writing done, right? I'll have made progress. It will move the ball forward. It will go forward substantially every single day. And that will result in probably me writing the book in a similar timeline as to if I just pick an arbitrary deadline. The difference is in the last 2 examples, I had some kind of constraint. I had some kind of quota. I had some kind of expectation. I planned what I was going to do. Now, and that's what, I guess that's what I'm saying is it's not necessarily the deadline. It's having the constraint. It's having the commitment. Commitment is the thing, right? So you're not going to learn. You're not going to advance. You're not going to do something if you just say, it's the same thing when I go to the gym. From 3 to 5 every day is my workout time. I'm either running 10 miles or I'm going to the gym. It's not a non-negotiable thing. I don't say, well, when I feel like it, or when I get around to it, or sometime today I need to go and hit the gym, or sometime this week. No, that's not going to happen. Anyone that's ever tried to stick to a fitness program knows that. So you got to have something that's holding you. You have to have accountability, and you have to have commitment. If you don't have that, you will fail. You will fail, and you will fail, and you'll fail, and you'll procrastinate, because that's what we do as humans. We're good at that. So it doesn't have to be a deadline, but it's got to be something. Commitment, consistency, some accountability that's going to make you and push you to the thing. You can't just, if you go by feelings, if you go how you feel and stuff like that, some days you're going to feel bad, and some days you're going to feel good, and you're never going to be consistent. You've got to make decisions and then stick by them.
And I think this is a good segue into the last thing that I wanted to talk about here, because I know you're on a tight schedule and we're running just a couple minutes probably over what we've allotted here. But I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about something that I love, and that is the Kanban board and the Pomodoros. And using that technique in order to manage your time and your days, and to set those goals like you were just talking about, to set aside and have a commitment towards some of those things.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So actually, maybe you can link to it. I've got a video that called How I Plan My Week, and I go over the process. But essentially what I do is, at the beginning of the week, I have a Kanban board, and it's got Monday through Sunday on there, right? And it's got a next week column and a today column. And I plan out all the work that I'm going to do in cards on that Pomodoro, or on that Kanban board, in terms of how many Pomodori is going to take me. And the Pomodori is plural. What it is it's just this very simple technique where you work for 25 minutes, focus on a single task. No interruptions, nothing. You just focus on that task, and then you take a 5-minute break, and that's the Pomodoro, right? The Pomodoro.
Pomodoro. Hey, I got a tomato.
And then, so the idea, it's real simple, but when you combine this stuff together, this is what you get. And this is kind of the psychology behind it. So, how you have that big to-do list, right? And you got these things, what you're going to do today. And then, this one thing ends up taking a lot longer but you worked really hard during the day, but you checked off 4 items, but you didn't check off 5, or you checked off 2 items out of 5. And it wasn't really your fault. You were working, you were busting your butt, and you feel like crap because you didn't get done this arbitrary list because you didn't know how long things were going to take. And so you feel guilty, right? So if you do Pomodoro, and you do this kind of planning thing, what I do is I say, okay, today I'm going to get done 8 Pomodori. That's my goal for the day. And I've planned out, I'm like, okay, a blog post is going to take me 3 Pomodori, right? I know how much it'll take me. It's also going to take me that because to some degree I'm time boxing it, right? I'm kind of doing, I'm cheating my estimate by making my estimate be very truthful. And sometimes it does run over, but for the most part, I can very accurately estimate what I'm going to get done. And I plan out, and for every day, I know how many, my capacity, let's say it's 8 Pomodori in a day. I'm going to pull in enough work that's going to fill in 8 Pomodori worth of work, right? And then my goal for the day is to get 8 Pomodori done. That's it. Now, if I get done what I planned, what I estimated, that's great. But I can only control that I worked hard and focused. I can't control how long things end up taking, right? To some degree, I'm trying to hit that, but I can feel good at the end of the day when I finish that. And it's a really good way to estimate. It's very accurate. It makes you feel better at the end of the day. And then if you're not getting done what you need to get done, you've got and you're hitting your Pomodori goal, right? You've got one problem, and it's a simple problem to identify. It's prioritization. And so you can tackle that problem. When you have this big to-do list and you're not getting stuff done, and you're like, shit, you don't know, are you working hard enough? Are you working on the right things? Or, are you getting distracted too much? But you can eliminate all of that and just go to, if I'm not getting what needs to be done, I'm not prioritizing right. and if you do this technique. So
Right.
that's why I like it.
You're either not prioritizing right, or you're not considering how much time it really takes to get those type of things done. And I think oftentimes we underestimate how much time we think it's going to take, because we go through the logical steps of what we have to do and go, oh, it's going to take only this little bit of time, and then we realize as we get closer to the end of that Pomodoro time, we're going wow, this is taking a lot longer than I expected it to. But going through that exercise, knowing that, okay, this actually does take a little bit longer for me to do these type of things, will help you later on when you try to once again do those things. Because I'm constantly being asked for quotes on projects. How long is it going to take me to get a job done? And now I have the experience, because I've been measuring it through Pomodoros and using a Kanban board to determine how long I think a project's going to take. And now, once I lay it all out, I have a good idea from top to bottom that I'm probably going to have to do. I know there's going to be a few issues here and there of stuff that I don't know. They're just discovery items. They're artifacts that are going to come along. But I can get a pretty good grasp of exactly how long it's going to take me to do something. And it makes it much easier for me to plan my days and hit those goals, hit those scheduled events that I've laid out for myself.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I think one thing I'd say too, just a quick tip on that, is I never allow, when I plan, nothing can be more than 3 Pomodori in length, no task, because our estimation ability greatly diminishes as we start to exceed about 2 hours worth of. We can estimate something that's going to take 5 minutes really good, right? We could be like, this is 5 minutes, and honestly, we could be very accurate. And as a half hour, we've got a bit of a fudge factor. It might take 45 minutes, might take 15, and as we start to go up. So when people try to estimate how much work they can get done in a week, or something like, this task will probably take me 1 week, they could be off by 4 weeks, right? It's too much. So I break things down, take the big tasks and break them down until you can estimate them down into 1, 2, or 3 Pomodori. And if you do that, then you're going to be a lot more accurate, because you might still be off, but it's going to be a cumulative error, which is going to be a lot less than at that small scale than it will be as one big error. If your fudge factor, if you have a lot of things, right? If you have a lot of items and you're off by a little bit on all those, yes, cumulatively it could be a lot, but it's probably going to average out, right? And you're probably going to be pretty accurate when you add them all up. But if you have one thing and you're off by 50%, you're off by 50%. That's, that doesn't get averaged out. So the more you can break things up and estimate the little pieces, the better more accurate your estimation is going to be.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the technique that we're talking about here, with using the Kanban board and using Pomodoros, I will definitely give a link to John's video on using the Kanban board and Pomodoros, because I think it's a very useful tool and I use it all the time. And I don't think that you mentioned anywhere in there the Fibonacci scale to determine your Pomodoros. So that's just something you might want to sneak in there at some point to talk about, how the estimation process, and using the Fibonacci scale. I don't know if it's something that you use for trying to determine it, but I have found it's helpful in trying to determine exactly the amount of units I'm going to need to set aside for a particular task.
Yeah. Actually, I don't. Because I just try to keep it 1, 2, or 3 Pomodori, and then this way, because I find that when you start to go up in the Fibonacci scale, it becomes more of a wag on the estimates as you go on the higher end of it. The small stuff we get good, but the big stuff I've never seen. Something that is high up there that's accurately estimated. I just break those down.
Yeah, the typical advice is if you reach 13, if you're thinking it's going to take you 13 Pomodoro, then you need to refigure out, you need to reanalyze and break down that one big task into smaller tasks so that you can get 1, 2, 3 Pomodoro instead of having 13 of them.
Yeah.
Well, John, I don't know if you have any more time, because I know that we have gone already 10 minutes past what we allocated here, but I do have one more question if you're interested in answering.
Okay, I'll do one more since you got me on the
Okay.
mystery of it.
Well, I have a question from Harris here on and I'm going to try to make heads or tails of his question here. He says, since there are tools which make your job easier and get things done quickly, while the trade-off is that you don't learn the underlying technology. So I think what he's talking about here is that there are tools like Access, for example, that they make things very simple, but you don't understand all the inner workings of them. So how would you try to overcome that hurdle? Would you try to just say, I'm not going to work with this technology if I can't learn more about the underlying stuff, or should you try to learn as much as you can about it and then just use that as an application towards other things?
So my opinion, which is somewhat controversial, is try to work at the highest abstraction as possible. That's where you're more efficient. And the exception to that is leaky abstractions. And you'll know, sometimes you will have to go in. But like, okay, I want to drive my car, right? I don't want to know how the engine works and all that stuff. Yes, I would be a better automobile operator if I knew that stuff and could fix my car. But for the most part, 90% of the time, if that abstraction isn't leaky, I can just drive the car and not have to know that stuff. Now, if I need to know the stuff, I can go and learn the stuff and dig in there. But technically, I don't need to, because I can take it to a mechanic and that I can use my skill set somewhere else, right? So it's the same thing with programming languages and technologies is, you know, some people get pissed off at the boot camp, the coding boot camps, because they're like, well, these guys, they're just learning in 3 months how to do this, and they don't really know all the underlying stuff and how it actually works. They don't know computer science. They don't know all this stuff that I had to learn for 13 years or whatever. And so they're just hacks. No, not true. They're operating at a higher level of abstraction, and they're accomplishing stuff. Yes, when there's trouble, your ability to understand algorithmically how the search function works and to be able to dig into the deep and understand the operating system and signals and all of this stuff may help you in some specific cases. But if you can get away with operating at the higher level of abstraction, do it. There's plenty of stuff to learn, plenty of stuff to know. You know, if you want to become a specialist and expert in an area, then you need to learn, you know, if you're using a car, you don't need to know how an engine works. If you want to become an auto mechanic, you do. So think about it. If you're using a technology and you can use it and do what you need to do, fine. Don't worry about what's happening underneath there. Work at that level of abstraction. But if you're going to become an absolute expert in it and you're going to troubleshoot the deep, dark problems with it, then you got to know the stuff underneath. But I tend to use the whole, you know, just-in-time learning, I think is the JIT you know, approach is best, because we have so much to learn today that it's not worth the investment, you know, right off the bat.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you that. I mean, I don't know hardly anything of what the JIT compiler actually even does. I just know it exists and I know it does its job. And as long as I don't do anything really stupid, it's going to work just fine. And like you said, the car analogy is a great one that, you know, we don't have to understand everything about the technology to be able to use it effectively. It's helpful, yes, to understand those underlying technologies. But sometimes it's, you know, it's outsmarting yourself, I think, to think that you shouldn't do something just because you can't fully grasp everything underneath it.
Right. Yep.
Well, John, I really appreciate your time, and I want to tell you on behalf of everybody here at Programming Made Easy that we really appreciate your advice and coming on the show and talking to us about your experiences, about your life, and you know, giving us some of that solid advice that you've been known to have, both on your YouTube channel, from the Pluralsight courses, and your books. And we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's been an honor to be here, and I'm glad to do it. So,
thank you, John, and I look forward to seeing you guys a little bit later.
Take care.